Do you ever catch yourself saying, English is just crazy? Maybe your students come across a tricky word and you tell them, you just have to memorize that one, or this is the part you have to know by heart. But deep down, you know it's still confusing. Here's the truth. English isn't random. It's a wonderfully complex system, and once you understand how that system works, through sound, structure, and meaning, everything changes. That's what Sarah, Paul, and I teach inside Mastering Morphology. This isn't another curriculum. It's deep teacher knowledge inside a practical, comprehensive course that finally shows you how words really work. No more exceptions, no more gimmicks or patching holes with memorization or phonics alone. It's time to go beyond sound it out and give your students the framework they need to truly understand words. So if you're ready to stop guessing and start teaching with confidence, join us inside Mastering Morphology. Enrollment is open now, so we invite you to click the link in the show notes to get started. You're listening to episode 76 of Literacy in Color. Welcome to the Literacy in Color podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Sullivan, a science of reading advocate with over a decade of experience as a reading interventionist and literacy coach. I'm passionate about making evidence-based instruction both effective and engaging. If you're interested in captivating our learners on reading fluently and understanding language, or as I like to call it, keeping it colorful, then you've found the right place. Each week, we'll explore intriguing lit bits and practical strategies around the science of reading and structured literacy to help you be colorful and teach colorfully. Are you ready to bring literacy to life? Let's color outside the lines and make an impact together. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Literacy in Color. And today is a really special episode to me because I'm here with my partner in crime, my structured literacy sister, and the other half of Logos Literacy Academy, Sarah Paul.
Hi. I'm so excited to be here with you again. Thank you for having me. This is one that I've been really excited about.
So just a little background, Sarah and I created Logos Literacy Academy last year, and we've been really busy little bees doing a lot of creating. So we created our first course, Mastering Morphology, that builds really deep teacher knowledge around morphology, and it really answers the what and the why behind morphology. Now we created our second course that also includes a curriculum around K2 morphology. So this is how it looks in the primary classroom. So course 2 is all about implementation. And of course, we recommend taking both, but we've split them up into separate courses to honor wherever you are on your journey.
And we're really excited about this curriculum because we honestly don't think there's anything else quite like it out there. So as we built it, we realized we needed more than one type of lesson. So we ended up creating 3. But they all work together pretty seamlessly. So we have your traditional affix lessons, which are your common prefixes and suffixes. But we also have a huge set of lessons that focus on a base. What's especially exciting about these, particularly for K2, is that we've intentionally aligned them to phonics skills. So they can just slide right into the instruction that you're already doing. And we have a mixture of free bases and then some bound bases. And last but not least, we also created a set of kindergarten specific lessons. And for these, we were really intentional about starting with oral language because that's where kids are building word knowledge long before print even comes into play. So I think we surprised ourselves with how rich those lessons could be, right?
Oh my gosh, yeah. And what we were saying as we were designing them, we knew how powerful they could be. And as we were researching words even more, we were like, oh my gosh, this is just so good. So today we're going to be zooming all the way into our K2 classrooms to talk about morphology, and not necessarily morphology in the way that people often imagine it. Oftentimes people will think about those Greek and Latin bases, perhaps memorizing affixes. But what morphology looks like when it's done in a developmentally appropriate way for our youngest learners with intention is it's building language and understanding about word structure over time.
Yes, exactly. And we want to be really clear up front, right? That this episode is about why we built those K2 lessons specifically and how we think about morphology for young learners and what shifts when you center instruction around a base. So it is going to be different than I think most of the morphology episodes that maybe we've heard on other podcasts.
Yeah. So, Sarah, we're going to start with the reaction that we hear all of the time. Morphology is important, but isn't that for later? So why was it important for us to design something specifically for K2?
Well, I think the biggest issue is that we often underestimate what young children already know about words and what they can do. So before they even read or write, kids are already using really sophisticated language systems. They understand that words change and they hear these patterns. They know that played, player, and replay are connected, but they might not be able to explain why or how.
Exactly. And morphology doesn't start when kids can define prefixes and suffixes. It really starts with oral language.
And one of the biggest misconceptions we're pushing against is this idea that early literacy has to be kept simple by avoiding that word structure, because we jump into sometimes multisyllabic words when we look at morphology, even with our younger students, or words that follow suffixing conventions like the doubling rule. And so even I think you and I early on were kind of nervous about if we could do this, but avoiding structure actually makes things harder later. And what we're doing is when we delay morphology, we miss that early chance to help kids build that framework of how words actually work. They're using these words. They're seeing these words. We don't need to avoid them. And there's a way to do it in a developmentally appropriate way.
Yeah. And when you think about the importance of language, Dr. Nell Thompson, who's the creator of Big Sky, she often says language is everything. And one of her big messages is that a student's language output is only as good as our input. And when we ground K2 learning foundational skills with simple monosyllable words, we're doing them a disservice by not building their language. So to us, it's really not even just about phonics. This is about building students' language, their language skills. And this really matters because when we zoom out, students are expected to learn thousands of new words every single year. And we can't explicitly teach every word under the sun. It's impossible. So then the question becomes, how do we help students build words efficiently? And how do we give them tools to unlock meaning on their own without us? And that's where studying bases comes in. Before we dive further, because when we say morphology in K2, we want to be really clear about what we are and are not talking about.
Yes, absolutely. Because I think people immediately picture Greek and Latin roots, affix flashcards, and memorizing morpheme meanings. And that is not what this is at all. So for young learners, morphology is about noticing meaningful parts in words, especially parts that stay stable across many words, and seeing the relationship between words.
Yeah, and that's why we really center instruction around a base. So as literate adults, if I asked you what does suffix ION mean, most people couldn't give a clear definition. And that goes with all of the prefixes and suffixes under the sun, right? We don't inherently memorize these definitions or have them ingrained in our brains, but you understand them in the context of language, in the context of a word. We know the relationship between act and action. And so you understand this meaning and context because the base is what's doing the heavy lifting, not the affix.
Absolutely. And I think that's why I shied away from morphology for so long, is because I was like, well, I can't memorize these suffixes or all these prefixes. But then you realize, yeah, when you put it with a base, that's where you have all the meaning. Without the base, you have nothing. The base is where the bulk of the meaning lives. And then the affixes, so those are prefixes and suffixes, they refine and extend that meaning, but they don't create it on its own.
Yeah. So in K2 morphology, again, it's not about memorizing affixes. It's not about doing these drills with affixes like we would do with sound spelling cards. It's about helping students hear the meaning, see the meaning, and track the meaning across related words. And that can, and what we believe really should, start really early. So this brings us to the heart of today's episode, our signature base lesson framework. So this is a framework that Sarah and I co-developed under Logos Literacy Academy. So you've heard it here first. Sarah, can you walk us through what BASE actually stands for?
Absolutely. So our BASE lessons follow a predictable 4-part routine, and we use the letters BASE. B stands for build awareness. A stands for analyze the base. S stands for see word relatives, and E for express understanding. And each step is intentional, and each one aligns with what we know about oral language development, the reading brain, phonics, and early spelling.
Aren't we so clever?
We were pretty excited when we came up with the BASE part. Like I do remember when we made that breakthrough. We were like, yes.
It's so true. So we're going to dive into each component of this framework so you can get a taste of what to expect within our lessons. So first up, the B. B is for build awareness. And this step is always oral. So when we think about the reading brain, we're tapping into that frontal lobe. Again, before students ever see print, we want them tuned into sound and meaning. So when we're working on CVC words, we might take a base like mix, and we might say mixes, mixing, mixer, remix. And we might ask, what do all of these words have in common? We want them to notice that they all have mix in them. So we might even act it out or use everyday props to bring these words to life. So for example, if we were working on a base like tap, you might tap your feet with the students and say, wait, what did I do a second ago? Oh, I tapped my feet. And right now, this second, I'm tapping my feet. So you're painting a real picture about using these words in context.
And simply just by asking our students to pay attention. What's the same? What's different? They're tapping into sound, but they're also tapping into meaning when you get to some of those more complex words, like even remix and what that could possibly mean. So this might feel basic, but we're giving their brain a mental hook into language before print ever enters the picture. They're using systems they already have: listening, meaning, pattern recognition. So even though it seems simple, it's a really essential step before we get started with the print. So that brings us to step 2, analyze the base. Here, we introduce the base in print. So this is where phonics, spelling, and meaning all come together. We show the word and connect sounds to symbols, but just as importantly, we focus on meaning. We give students time to think about the meaning of the word, and we also clearly define it. So one part of the brain says, I know those sounds. Another says, I know what that means. And now a third says, I know what it looks like. So this is explicit. We're not hoping kids make the connection. We're showing them.
Yeah. And then third up is S for C word relatives. So this is where things really shift because students see a family of words and learn the criteria for belonging to the family. Often in K2, when we think of word families, we're thinking of words that rhyme like hat, cat, sat, fat, rat. But in the context of morphology, we're thinking about word families in terms of those that share a common base. So we're going to look for a shared spelling of the base. It's going to have that same letter string, but it's also going to have a shared meaning. And in order to belong, it needs to have both. So this is the heart of the lesson because it's where students start to see how words actually connect. So in the earlier lessons, we group word relatives using a word family house. And then later, we use something called a word matrix. And the goal of the earlier lessons is to show students what it really means for words to be related. So they learn that true word relatives share both spelling and meaning. And this understanding will be really important later when we get into bound bases. So we'll use the example with the base tap. So we'll look at a word like tapped, tapping, tape, and hit. And students will decide which ones are related. So if you look at just the spelling, you might think a word like tape, spelled T-A-P-E, is related because you see the letters T-A-P in them, but they don't share a meaning. And on the other hand, if you look at meaning alone, you might think that hit is related, but they don't share the same letter string of the base. So again, true relatives share both.
Then as the lessons progress, the word families get larger and you start to see similar affixes across different bases. That repetition is key. So let's give a basic example. With the word pack, you'll get related words like packed, packing, packer, unpack, packet, and repack. Then you'll have lock as another base, and you'll see words like locked, locking, locker, unlock, lock it, and relock. See what we did there? So instead of relearning something from scratch, they're applying what they already know to a new base. And this will really pay off when we move to bound bases or just in general when we get to much bigger words.
And this is super exciting to us because as we developed our lessons, like we said in the beginning, we also have explicit lessons on affixes. So we do teach suffix s and suffix ed and suffix ing and tell you when would be a good time to introduce those affixes along your phonics scope and sequence. But as you can see, we're revisiting these affixes all of the time in the context of language. And that's really exciting when we think about the science of learning and retrieval practice and interleaving and spaced practice, because we're doing all of those things. These affixes are coming up again and again and again. It's just not a one-off lesson like most traditional morphology curricula are out there.
And something to think about too is that for a lot of those earlier lessons, we're relying a lot on oral language and we're showing the print. They're seeing how these words are spelled, but that doesn't mean we're necessarily asking them to spell all of these words, especially if they're unfamiliar with the affixes. But you'd be surprised through base exploration, they do learn these affixes pretty well.
Tell your story about ION.
Oh, yes. So I love this. When I was working with a group of second graders, I was exploring bases with them. And this is kind of earlier on when I was trying to figure out morphology. And this is how I learned the power of base exploration. We would look at different bases and it's impossible to not have words with ION, right? That suffix is everywhere. And so by the time I actually got to my explicit lesson on ION, the students were like, well, yeah, I mean, they didn't say duh, but they were basically like, yeah, duh, Mrs. Pollock, we know ION because we have seen it so many times through these base lessons. And it doesn't help to just avoid it because they're seeing ION in print as well. So by exploring bases, you're giving a little bit more structure and guidance to it without explicitly teaching the lesson. And then the great part was when I did get to the explicit lesson for ION, I was able to add so much more onto it. And the lesson itself was richer. And it was so cool because they already had so much background knowledge with that suffix.
I love that story. And when we think about a lot of our bound bases, which we mentioned we have towards the end of our base curriculum, and there will be a lot more of that to come in our 3-5 curriculum. But the related words are not always as obvious. So they'll carry the same sense and meaning throughout them. Like our base carries this core essence. Like we'll think about the base, for example, RUPT. So the words with this base all have to do with breaking or bursting. You have erupt, disrupt, and interrupt. But we'll explore those relatives and we're basically training our students to look for the thread that ties them all together. So we're so passionate about this and we can go on and on about this part, but let's move on to our last section of our framework, E for express understanding.
So by this point, we've explored the base and now it's time to apply it in context. And during this part of the lesson, we're going to show sentences with a word missing. And students have to choose the word that makes sense and fits in that sentence. And the word is always going to be a word that uses the base in some way. So sometimes this is orally or early on, the teacher can just read the sentence and then students will use their word family house or the word matrix to choose the word that fits best. What we love about this is that they're having to still put the pieces of the word together. So all of the morphemes together to figure out which word makes sense in the sentence. So this is where morphology directly supports comprehension and grammar. So we ended up loving this little part of our lesson.
Yeah, and especially when we look at the research on grammar, that we know that grammar instruction is not effective when it's isolated drilling of terms and when it's not integrated with other things. And so we found this part to be super impactful because it was like, oh my gosh, we cracked the code on how to teach grammar in a way that is meaningful.
Yes. And in fact, we even ended up adding outside of our BASE, we even added this whole section for most of the lessons about how you can go deeper with grammar because we just found that you can't ignore it and we shouldn't. It's so rich and it's a perfect opportunity to explore, oh, how mixer is not a verb, right? You think of mix, you think, oh, it's going to be a verb. Well, it is in a lot of cases, but it can also be a noun. And then mixer becomes a noun. And so just looking at how the same base with different affixes actually play different roles within a sentence. And there is a way to do this in an age appropriate way for K2. That is not overwhelming. We're not diagramming sentences, but that was another fun surprise for us, right? Is seeing how much grammar instruction we can get out of these lessons.
Yeah. And even when we think about grammar, a lot of times what we see out there are word sorts. And it was like, oh my gosh, we can never label this as a noun or a verb because it depends on the sentence. It depends on the context. And then digging into multiple meaning words. And
So fun.
it's just, there's so much richness.
So fun. And as fun as this podcast is, it's hard because there's so much we want to say about these lessons. I mean, we really are kind of just giving you the skeleton.
And we're so proud of them.
We are so proud. We are so proud. So we know one of the biggest questions we often get asked is, where does this live in the literacy block?
Yeah. And the answer is it slides right into phonics. So again, we have our own phonics scope and sequence, and it can align seamlessly with other scopes and sequences out there. And we asked ourselves these questions. So at this point, if I'm learning XYZ in phonics, which base can students meaningfully explore? So, for example, we took a phonics concept like CPC, and then we chose bases that would align with that phonics feature. So you can have an extension of your phonics lesson, and it wouldn't necessarily be daily, like you would have to do this every day within phonics, but it also wouldn't be a new block. So it's, again, an extension of phonics that makes phonics even more powerful.
Absolutely. Especially you think about like a first grade class, right? And they might spend a week on something like vowel teams. Maybe they're doing vowel teams, OA, OW. And you can then look at the word load. So you've already taught your lessons. You've been working on this skill. You've been spelling, but think about how much richer it is when you look into one base and all of the words that you can make with that base. It's just, it extends it so much more while you're still doing that phonics skill. And they can practice spelling, their vocabulary is growing, you're working on grammar. It just really does it all.
Yeah. And the fun thing is when we're training students to look at words in this way very early on, even at the CVC level, they're going to start being in the habit of doing these things on their own. So maybe you only explored one base with them that week, but they're going to make those connections, whether it's in conversations or the books that they're reading, and they're going to be thinking about language in a new way. And it's going to make them word conscious, these word noticers, and they're going to be seeing like all of these connections all over all of the time. And I think that's a beautiful thing to cultivate.
That's the goal, right? Phonics teaches students how to read, and then morphology really helps them understand what words mean and how they grow. So you really do need both.
Yeah. And so if a student is moving through K2 with this kind of instruction, again, Sarah, let's reinforce what changes for later.
Everything. They approach unfamiliar words differently. They expect words to make sense. They look for the structure. They don't panic when a word is long. They look for these connections.
Yeah. And that's really the goal for students to see words in this organized, meaningful system, not just these random strings of disconnected letters. Mm-hmm. So to wrap up, let's just do a really quick recap. So call and response with me. So is this instead of phonics?
No, this just strengthens phonics.
And do students need to know and define all of this fancy schmancy terminology around morphology?
No, ma'am. Understanding comes before these labels.
And what if a teacher feels unsure about how to do this work?
That's exactly why our lessons are so scripted and structured and really supportive. We have a lot of information and the course goes with it. So they can always check back with the course. And don't forget our monthly live so they can just hop right on and ask a question.
So Sarah and I, in addition to our course, we have something called Logos Live. So if you become a course student, you're automatically enrolled in Logos Live for 2 years. And those are our monthly coaching calls. So you have access to us to ask us questions in real time, whether it be around course content, curriculum content, or just words that you're curious about, how you would handle certain scenarios with your students. And those are recorded. They're housed on the hub. You have access to all of the recordings that we've done in the past. We throw in some supplemental resources and fun resources that you can use with your students as well. And you can also join Logos Live as a standalone, and you just want to take part in our coaching calls, which is super exciting. So as we wrap up, if teachers walk away with one mindset shift, we truly hope that it's this. It's that morphology in K-2 is not about doing more. It's about helping students see more meaning in the words that they're already learning and using. So not only does this support the process of orthographic mapping, but it promotes generative word learning and vocabulary growth while reinforcing grammar.
It does it all. And if you're curious what this looks like in action, we're offering a free base lesson to download in the show notes. So this one is not from our curriculum. It's actually a bonus lesson that can give you a real taste of our framework.
Yeah, so be sure to check that out and download it for yourself. And in the future, we're going to dive into our affix framework as well as our kindergarten specific lessons. So stay tuned for those. And in the meantime, again, be sure to check out the free download to one of our base lessons in the show notes and let us know what you think. So we're so happy to hear from you. You reach out with questions or even your comments, and we're excited to connect with you further and super excited to support you on your journey of implementing morphology in this way in the primary classroom.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on.
Of course. Where would I be without you?
Same.
Thank you so much for tuning into Literacy in Color. I hope today's episode left you feeling both inspired and equipped with something new to add to your teaching toolkit. If you're enjoying this podcast, it would truly mean so much to me if you'd leave a 5-star review. It helps other educators find the show and join our colorful community. And don't forget to hit the follow or subscribe button so you never miss an episode. For more tips, tools, and resources, be sure to check out the links in the show notes at michelleandthecolorfulclassroom.com. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you next week. Until then, be colorful and teach colorfully.